Flying is a modern miracle we often take for granted. We step inside a metal tube, a carefully engineered marvel of physics and ingenuity, and surrender ourselves to the vast empty expanse of the sky. There is a unique thrill to it, a sense of detachment from the world below as continents and oceans shrink to the size of a map. We are suspended between Earth and heaven, moving at speeds our ancestors could only dream of. This experience taps into a deep human desire to conquer our limitations, to rise above the mundane and touch something sublime. It is a testament to our ability to solve impossible problems and to trust in the complex systems we have built. Yet, with this incredible power comes an equally potent primal fear. This fear is not irrational. It is born from a fundamental understanding of our own biology. We are terrestrial creatures, designed to walk on solid ground. When we are thousands of feet in the air, a small logical part of our brain knows that we are in an inherently unnatural state. We have placed our lives in the hands of pilots we have never met and mechanics we will never see. This surrender of control, this absolute trust in technology and strangers, creates a quiet tension that hums just beneath the surface of the in-flight movie and the complimentary beverage service. This duality of thrill and fear is what makes air travel so compelling. We are simultaneously masters of the sky and helpless passengers along for the ride. Every slight bump of turbulence can send a jolt of adrenaline through the cabin, a stark reminder of the powerful forces of nature that surround our fragile vessel. We look out the window at the clouds, beautiful and serene, but we know that within them can lurk violent winds and unseen dangers. We are acutely aware that the thin aluminum skin of the aircraft is all that separates us from the unforgiving void outside. This delicate balance between safety and peril is the silent contract we sign every time we board a plane. The journey through the air becomes a metaphor for life itself. We set out with a destination in mind, trusting in the path laid out for us. We experience moments of breathtaking beauty and moments of unsettling uncertainty. We are surrounded by fellow travelers, each on their own journey, sharing a common space for a brief period. The experience forces us to confront our own mortality, to acknowledge our vulnerability, and to place our faith in something larger than ourselves. It is in this space, between the excitement of the ascent and the relief of the landing, that the human spirit is both tested and affirmed, revealing our capacity for both great anxiety and profound trust. There's a strange and powerful pull to disaster stories, especially those set in the sky. We find ourselves drawn to movies and documentaries that depict the very scenarios we fear the most. Why do we willingly watch tales of planes falling from the sky? The answer lies not in a morbid curiosity, but in a deep-seated need to understand and prepare. These stories act as a form of controlled experiment for our minds. They allow us to experience the unthinkable from the safety of our living rooms. We can confront the chaos, witness the struggle, and feel the terror all without any real personal risk. It is a way of mentally rehearsing for a crisis we hope to never face. Watching these narratives unfold provides a unique kind of emotional release, known as catharsis. We invest ourselves in the characters' plight, feeling their panic and their desperation as if it were our own. When they fight back, when they show courage against impossible odds, we feel a surge of inspiration. When they survive, we share in their triumph and relief. This vicarious experience allows us to process our own anxieties about flying and control. It takes our abstract fears and gives them a concrete form, a story with a beginning, a middle, and most importantly, an end. By watching others endure and overcome, we find a strange sense of comfort and reassurance. Furthermore, these stories strip away the complexities of modern life and reduce existence to its most essential elements. In a plane crash scenario, social status, wealth, and daily worries become instantly irrelevant. The only things that matter are survival, cooperation, and the will to live. This raw, unfiltered view of humanity is captivating. It reminds us of what is truly important. We see people from all walks of life forced to rely on one another, their shared humanity becoming the only currency that matters. These films are not just about destruction, they are about the powerful bonds that form in the crucible of a crisis, showcasing the best of what people can be when faced with the worst. Ultimately, we watch these films to learn. They are not just entertainment, they are cautionary tales and lessons in resilience. We see the mistakes that were made, the chain of events that led to the disaster, and we absorb the information. More importantly, we see the strategies that led to survival. We learn about the importance of staying calm, of working together, of listening to instructions, and of never giving up hope. These stories arm us with knowledge and in a way empower us. They transform a faceless fear into a problem that, with the right mindset and actions, can potentially be overcome. We watch to be reminded that even in the darkest of moments, the human spirit can find a way to endure. A plane crash is not a single, instantaneous event. It is a process, a terrifying sequence of moments where the laws of physics assert their dominance over the marvels of engineering. It begins with a deviation from the norm, a sudden, violent shudder, an unnatural sound, a loud bang, a grinding metal screech, or the deafening silence of engines failing. This is the moment when the collective consciousness of the cabin shifts from passive travel to active crisis. The carefully constructed illusion of safety shatters, replaced by the raw, visceral reality that something has gone profoundly wrong. The human brain, wired for pattern recognition, immediately flags this as a life-threatening anomaly. As the aircraft begins its descent, the forces at play are immense and overwhelming. Gravity, a constant and gentle companion on the ground, becomes a relentless and terrifying enemy. The plane may lurch, roll, or enter a steep dive, subjecting everyone inside to powerful G-forces that pin them to their seats. Loose objects become deadly projectiles, flying through the cabin with incredible speed. The noise is often indescribable, a symphony of screaming wind, groaning metal, and the panicked cries of passengers. This is a moment of pure sensory overload, where the mind struggles to process the flood of terrifying information. The world outside the window becomes a blur of sky and earth spinning in a chaotic dance. Inside the cabin, instinct takes over. The pre-flight safety briefing, perhaps ignored by many, suddenly becomes the most important information one has ever received. The simple instruction to brace for impact is a critical command. By tucking one's body into a protective crouch, pressing one's head against the seat in front, a person can significantly increase their chances of surviving the initial impact. It is a small act of control in a situation that is completely out of control. It is a conscious decision to fight for survival, to prepare the body for the immense physical shock that is about to come. This moment of bracing is a psychological anchor in the storm of chaos. The final moments before impact are a strange mix of slow-motion clarity and fast-forward terror. The ground rushes up with astonishing speed. For those who remain conscious and aware, time seems to stretch and distort. The mind focuses on the most essential things: the faces of loved ones, the feel of the seatbelt, the sound of one's own breathing. Then comes the impact itself. A brutal, violent deceleration that brings everything to a sudden, catastrophic halt. The structure of the aircraft is designed to absorb as much of this energy as possible, crumpling and breaking apart to protect the passenger cabin. Surviving this moment is the first and most critical step in a long and arduous journey that has only just begun. The powerful movie that captures the essence of survival against all odds is often inspired by a real event that is even more harrowing and astonishing than fiction can portray. The story in question is that of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. On October 13, 1972, a chartered plane carrying 45 people, including members of a university rugby team, their friends and family, departed from Montevideo, Uruguay, heading for Santiago, Chile. The young men were full of life and excitement, looking forward to a match and the adventure that lay ahead. They were flying over the treacherous Andes Mountains, a formidable and unforgiving landscape of snow-capped peaks and razor-sharp ridges. The flight crew, facing deteriorating weather conditions, made a critical navigational error. Believing they had already cleared the highest peaks of the Andes, they began their descent towards what they thought was Santiago. Instead, they were flying directly into the heart of the mountain range. The Fairchild FH-227D aircraft clipped a mountain ridge, shearing off its right wing. The impact sent the plane into a terrifying spiral, and it struck another peak, which tore off the left wing. The main body of the plane, the fuselage, was now little more than a toboggan, hurtling down a steep snow-covered slope at an incredible speed before finally coming to a violent stop in a remote, desolate valley. The initial crash was catastrophic. Of the 45 people on board, 12 died either during the crash or shortly after. The survivors found themselves stranded at an altitude of over 11,000 feet in one of the most inaccessible environments on Earth. They were dressed for a spring weekend in Chile, not for the brutal, freezing conditions of the high Andes. They had almost no food, very limited medical supplies, and no equipment designed for cold weather survival. The wreckage of the fuselage became their only shelter against the biting winds and sub-zero temperatures that plummeted each night. Their initial hope for a swift rescue quickly began to fade. The world outside believed them to be lost. After 8 days of searching, rescue efforts were officially called off. The authorities concluded that it was impossible for anyone to have survived the crash, let alone the extreme conditions of the mountains. The survivors heard this news on a small transistor radio they had managed to get working. It was a devastating blow, a moment that could have extinguished all hope. Instead, for many it became a turning point. They realized that if they were going to be saved, they would have to save themselves. Their ordeal was just beginning, and they would have to draw upon reserves of strength and ingenuity they never knew they possessed. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, chaos reigned. The surviving passengers were dazed, injured, and disoriented, surrounded by the twisted metal of the fuselage and the bodies of their friends. The silence of the snow-covered valley was broken only by the moans of the injured and the biting wind. The initial shock was a formidable enemy, capable of paralyzing even the strongest individuals. Yet, amidst the horror, leaders began to emerge. 2 of the survivors were medical students, and they immediately set to work, tending to the wounded with the most rudimentary of supplies. They used whatever they could find to set broken bones and clean wounds, their actions providing a focal point of order in the pandemonium. This immediate response was a crucial first step in their collective survival. Those who were able-bodied began the grim task of clearing the fuselage, making space for the injured and creating a semblance of a shelter. They worked together, their shared purpose overriding their individual pain and fear. They understood, perhaps instinctively, that their only hope lay in functioning as a team. The rugby team's existing camaraderie provided a strong foundation for this cooperation. They were already accustomed to relying on one another, to pushing through pain for a common goal. This pre-existing bond was a vital asset in the face of an unimaginable crisis. As the first day wore on and the sun began to set, a new and more insidious threat appeared: the cold. The temperature dropped with alarming speed, and the survivors, clad in light clothing, began to experience the brutal effects of hypothermia. They huddled together inside the broken fuselage, using seat cushions and luggage to block the openings where the wings and tail had been ripped away. They used the warmth of their own bodies to fight off the deadly chill, packing themselves tightly together through the long, dark night. This simple act of huddling was not just for physical warmth, it was a profound act of shared humanity, a silent promise that they were all in this together. On that first night, and in the days that followed, the survivors demonstrated a remarkable capacity for practical problem-solving. They devised a system to melt snow into drinking water using small pieces of metal from the plane to catch the sun's rays. They rationed the meager food supplies they had found, a few chocolate bars, some crackers, and bottles of wine, with disciplined fairness. Every decision was made collectively, with the group's welfare as the primary concern. They established routines and assigned tasks, creating a small, functioning society in the middle of nowhere. This structure was their shield against despair, a way of asserting control in a world that had been violently torn apart. As days turned into weeks, the initial challenge of surviving the crash evolved into the long, grueling ordeal of surviving the environment. The Andes Mountains were not a passive backdrop to their struggle. They were an active and relentless antagonist. The survivors faced a host of dangers beyond the cold. The high altitude caused severe headaches, dizziness, and shortness of breath. The thin air made every physical exertion exhausting. The intense sunlight reflecting off the endless white snow caused snow blindness, a painful condition that felt like having sand poured into their eyes. They learned to fashion makeshift sunglasses from pieces of plastic and fabric to protect their vision. The mountain was also prone to sudden and violent mood swings. The weather could change in an instant, from clear sunny skies to a raging blizzard that would bury their shelter in feet of snow. The constant threat of avalanches loomed over them. One night, a massive avalanche cascaded down the mountain and completely buried the fuselage while they slept inside. This was a disaster within a disaster. 8 more people were killed, and the remaining survivors were trapped under the snow in complete darkness, struggling to breathe. It was a moment of absolute terror, a test that pushed them to the very brink of their endurance. For 3 days, they remained entombed in their snowy grave. The air grew stale and despair began to set in. Yet, even in this suffocating darkness, their will to live did not break. One of the survivors, Nando Parado, managed to poke a metal pole through the snowpack above, creating a small hole that allowed fresh air to filter into their cramped prison. This small victory was a monumental boost to their morale. It was a tangible sign that they could still fight back, that they were not completely helpless. Working together, they eventually managed to dig their way out, emerging back into the harsh sunlight, weakened but not defeated. This event fundamentally changed their understanding of their situation. They realized that the wreckage, which had been their shelter, was also a potential tomb. The mountain could kill them at any moment, without warning. Staying put was no longer a viable long-term strategy. The thought of rescue had long since faded, replaced by the stark realization that their only path to survival was to escape the mountains on their own. The avalanche, as horrific as it was, served as a brutal catalyst. It forced them to confront the necessity of taking an impossible risk, to cross the Andes on foot, an undertaking that seemed utterly suicidal but was now their only hope. The survivors of Flight 571 faced a slow and agonizing starvation. The few snacks they had salvaged from the wreckage were gone within the first week. They tried to eat strips of leather from the seats and luggage, but these provided no nourishment. As their bodies wasted away, they were confronted with a terrible and taboo choice. The bodies of their deceased friends and family members were preserved in the snow outside the fuselage. They were surrounded by a source of protein that could save their lives. But the moral and psychological barrier to consuming human flesh was immense. It was a choice that seemed to go against every value of their civilized, religious upbringing. The debate that ensued was intense and deeply personal. Some argued that it was their only way to survive, that their friends would have wanted them to live. Others were repulsed by the idea, viewing it as a desecration. The group was on the verge of splintering. It was Roberto Canessa, one of the medical students, who articulated the argument that ultimately swayed the majority. He framed it not as an act of cannibalism, but as a kind of holy communion. He argued that they would be taking the bodies and blood of their friends into themselves to continue living, to ensure that their deaths were not in vain. It was a pact made by the living, for the living. The decision was not made lightly. It was a profound act of intellectual and spiritual courage. They made a solemn pact that if any of them should die, the others should use their bodies to survive. This agreement transformed the act from something monstrous into a selfless sacrifice for the good of the group. It was the ultimate expression of teamwork and love, a final gift from the dead to the living. The first person to make the cut was Canessa, who, with great difficulty and prayer, prepared the first pieces of flesh. This act required an unbelievable amount of mental fortitude, a willingness to break one of society's greatest taboos in order to honor the primal imperative to live. This decision was the cornerstone of their survival. The nourishment they received from this desperate measure gave them the physical strength to endure the cold, to survive the avalanche, and to eventually plan their escape. It is a part of the story that is often difficult to discuss, but it is perhaps the most powerful example of how far the human spirit can be pushed. It demonstrates that survival is not just about physical endurance, but also about the ability to adapt one's moral and ethical framework in the face of extreme necessity. They did not become savages, they became survivors, making an impossible choice to uphold their promise to each other and to see their families again. With their strength partially restored, the survivors knew they could not wait any longer. They had to find a way out of the mountains. They selected a small team of the strongest individuals to make the trek. The chosen expeditionaries were Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa. Their goal was to hike west towards Chile in the hope of finding civilization. They had no mountaineering equipment, no map, and only a vague idea of which direction to go. They fashioned a makeshift sleeping bag by sewing together insulation from the plane's tail section, a critical invention that would protect them from freezing to death at night. Their journey was an epic feat of human endurance. For 10 grueling days, they climbed treacherous, snow-covered peaks and navigated dangerous glaciers. The air was thin, making every step a monumental effort. They faced exhaustion, starvation, and the constant bone-chilling cold. At one point, after climbing what they believed was the final peak, they reached the summit only to see an endless sea of more mountains stretching out before them. It was a moment of crushing despair. It would have been easy to give up, to lie down in the snow and let nature take its course. But Parado, fueled by the memory of his deceased mother and sister, refused to surrender. Parato's resolve became the driving force of the expedition. He convinced a despairing Canessa that they had to continue. They descended from the high peaks, following a small stream, a sign that they were moving towards lower altitudes. As they descended, the landscape began to change. They saw signs of life for the first time in over 2 months. First some moss, then grass, and eventually, a lizard. These small discoveries were monumental triumphs, proof that they were leaving the dead world of the high Andes and re-entering the world of the living. Their hope, which had been stretched to its breaking point, was rekindled. Finally, on the 10th day of their trek, they saw him, a Chilean farmer, a Huaso, on horseback across a river. At first, they were too weak to shout. They could only watch, praying he would see them. He did. The farmer, Sergio Catalan, could not understand their frantic gestures at first, but he knew they were in trouble. He threw them a piece of bread and a note wrapped around a rock. Parato wrote a message explaining who they were and threw it back. The farmer read the note, understood the miracle he was witnessing, and rode off to get help. The long, impossible journey was over. They had succeeded. They had saved themselves and the friends they had left behind at the fuselage. The story of Flight 571 is more than just a dramatic tale of survival. It is a profound testament to the power of the human spirit. It teaches us that within ordinary people lies an extraordinary capacity for courage, ingenuity, and resilience. These were not superhuman heroes. They were young men, students, and athletes who were thrust into an unimaginable situation. Their survival was not the result of one single heroic act, but of 1,000 small victories, a wound tended, a piece of metal angled to melt snow, a shared word of encouragement, a decision to take one more step when exhaustion screamed for surrender. One of the most vital lessons from their ordeal is the absolute necessity of teamwork and social cohesion. The group did not descend into a survival of the fittest mentality. Instead, they formed a micro-society built on cooperation, fairness, and mutual responsibility. They shared their meager resources, cared for the weak, and made their most difficult decisions collectively. This social structure was as critical to their survival as shelter or water. It provided the emotional and psychological support needed to combat the overwhelming despair of their situation. It reminds us that in times of crisis, our greatest strength lies in our connection to one another. The story also offers a powerful lesson about hope. Not a passive, wishful thinking kind of hope, but an active, determined hope. When the official search was called off, they could have surrendered to their fate. Instead, they transformed their hope for rescue into a resolve for self-rescue. They took control of their own destiny. This active hope fueled their creativity, driving them to invent solutions like the water melter and the sleeping bag. It gave them the strength to make their horrific pact and the courage to embark on their impossible trek. It teaches us that hope is not just a feeling, it is a choice and a powerful tool for survival. In the end, the legacy of the Andes survivors is one of inspiration. Their story forces us to look within ourselves and ask what we would be capable of in the face of such adversity. It strips away the trivialities of daily life and focuses on the core elements of human existence: life, death, faith, and the unbreakable will to live. It shows that even after enduring the unthinkable, it is possible to emerge not just alive but with a deeper appreciation for life and a more profound understanding of human potential. Their journey from the mountain's cruel embrace back into the world is a timeless reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of human resilience can shine through.